All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to the sharing event about Perform Europe. 42 projects, experimental projects with regards to greener and more inclusive touring have been on tour for the last year. So now we're here all together to learn more about what has happened. While people are entering the room, we can maybe already quietly start up. So, yeah, let's go. Indeed, today is a sharing event about Perform Europe. And as you know, Perform Europe is a funding scheme in the context of Creative Europe about greener and more inclusive international touring projects, but it's actually also more than that. There's been a learning trajectory as well. The 42 selected projects have been documenting and analyzing their lessons learned, and we're ready now to share about these lessons learned. That's exactly the aim of today. We will be meeting some of the projects. 3 inspirational projects will be presenting their lessons learned, but we'll also be zooming out, looking at the overall results of the learning trajectory. But not only sharing, this is going to be an interactive session. In fact, this session today is also part of the learning trajectory because what we really want to do is also capture your feedback, input, and this is what we will do with the series of breakouts and polls. You can go to the next slide, Egla. Indeed. How are we going to do it? Well, brief introduction, then presentations by our 3 selected inspirational Perform Europe projects, and then we will go into interactive rounds. Important to mention also, if needed and wanted, live captions are available. There's some option somewhere in the menu, and you can activate that if you would want to have live caption of what's being said. All right, we have a 2-hour session, so let's just dive into it with some maybe some introductory words about Perform Europe. Maybe you know about Perform Europe. Obviously you do because we're all here and you registered for the session. But briefly recap some of the main elements. Indeed, as I said, it's a funding scheme for the performing arts sector. Scope is the 40 Creative Europe countries. And indeed, Perform Europe is about reimagining touring. Touring in a more inclusive, more fair, more diverse, and more green way. And indeed, touring, this takes a bit the perspective of producers and artists, but in fact, all partnerships are collaborations between artists, producers, and presenters, festivals, and venues. So this is really what's been happening. There have been 2 priorities in this call. One is about fighting climate change. So what can we do in order to not only green our practices, but also have a positive role with regards to climate change. Second is inclusion and diversity. So how can we make a difference in the way we relate with specific communities which are underrepresented in the way we go on tour, the way we tour, the way we present our work. And as you know, 42 proposals have been selected. These projects have been going on tour. And so exactly today, we're going to have a look at what they have been developing and learning together. Indeed, this is an image that shows a bit where they have been. The projects have been all over this Creative Europe zone, and they've been learning a lot. And so let's look at that. Maybe a few words about this learning trajectory that we did, because often in funding projects, it's just about the funding. And of course, this is really important because it's a leverage that makes these efforts with regards to greening and more inclusive touring possible. But it's also important to go beyond that. When we talk about greening our practice and making it more inclusive, we're really talking about a systemic shift for the performing arts sector. And for that matter, it's really very important that the lessons learned go beyond the selected projects and who's involved in that. And that is exactly the why we have been organizing this learning trajectory for the last year since the projects have started up. It worked on a number of levels. We provided the projects with tools to engage in a discussion with their partners and everybody involved in the touring project. But we also organized a number of sessions where representatives of all the projects got together. We called them the log keepers because they kept track of the lessons learned along the journeys of their projects. So we brought together these log keepers in interactive sessions, and we will share what they have developed later in this session. If you already want to check it out, you can scan the QR code. There is a Perform Europe Learning Trajectory blog where you can find out how we've been working more in detail with the log keepers during the learning trajectory and also explore some of the results there. All right, but before we go into these learnings, maybe it's a good idea to get acquainted. And we are with many people in the room. I see we are with more than hundreds here. So maybe it's a nice thing that, well, we get to know each other a little bit better via a Slido poll that Egle has prepared. So you can scan the code, and first question is indeed, where are you based? Okay. It's quite an open question. This is a word cloud, so you can mention a city, you can mention a country, you can mention a continent, you can mention a planet, you can mention a galaxy, you can say that you're in the center of things, you can say that you're in the periphery of things. So let's see what's popping up with this first question. Yes. As often in these kinds of word clouds, somehow Paris is in the middle and Berlin and Brussels are not far away. But yes, Prague and Stockholm are also popping up. And Italy. It's not a coincidence that Italy is here because when we look at selected partners in all the projects, in fact, most of them have been coming from Italy. But important to mention also, activities have been taking place in all of the 40 countries, and selected partners are also there from all of the selected countries. All right, let's go to the next question. Yes, what is your role in the performing arts ecosystem? Are you an artist? Are you a producer? Do you work for a venue? Are you a writer, a researcher? Are you a manager? In fact, what role do you identify with? Producers and artists are at the center. Yes, but also we have a professor as well. That's good. Biologist. So it's quite an interdisciplinary cloud that we have. All right, and a head of climate emergency also at the funding body. So that's cool. We have quite a mixed crowd with some people really also engaged in international touring practices, while other are in observer mode. Yes. Okay, let's maybe move on to a third question.
Okay. Et là, Ambre, je rentre dans une...
Is it possible? Excuse me, someone. Is it possible to mute? Because then we were at a lot of people in the room. Thank you. So there's not really a lot of room for this kind of interaction. Third question: how would you describe your experience with fair, inclusive, and green touring? So really the priority topics of Perform Europe. We might have several options there. Either we are quite new to the topic, and this is the case for a lot of people, but it might also be the case that you've already set some experiments in your practice, trying out some new approaches with regards to fairer and more inclusive touring. or it could be also that you're beyond that and already structurally integrated greening, participatory work, community-oriented work in your practice. Or maybe you're already advocating or helping others to learn about it. So exactly, this is a bit kind of like the order that we have. A bit more than 1/3 of the people is quite new to the topic, but also a number of people have been experimented, and 1/3 are already quite advanced, having integrated interesting approaches in the core of their work, or even advocating about it. So this is really nice. Okay, now we know each other a little bit better. Maybe it's a good time to enter into the exchange while we're finding the right slides and giving you a bit behind the scenes view on in our Miro board. Maybe it's good to start with this exchange with 3 of the Perform Europe projects. Maybe we can welcome our panelists and maybe briefly introduce them, but we'll give them the floor one after another. We will be talking with Beatrice Allegranti from Moving Kinship. We will be talking with Caterina Moroni from the project Hand in Hand, and also with Teresa Jacovina from the Greenhouse Projects. How are we going to do it? Well, we have 30 minutes for this part, and we asked all 3 speakers to provide us with a brief pitch presentation of the essence of their project, what they've been doing, who's the partners, what's the activities. And after that, we'll have a moderator talk about the ambitions with their projects, what's really at stake artistically, but also with regards to Perform your priorities, and of course, more importantly, what are the lessons learned? So indeed, let's move on to our first speaker, and I will introduce Teresa Jacovina, visual artist and performer with a background specifically also in stage design. And what's very interesting in her practice that scenography is really also a tool as a way of creating social situations in the last period, also specifically in conflict areas and greenhouse. The participatory performance is an excellent example of that. For that, Teresa, can you please explain?
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I'm one of 2 core members of Greenhouse Collective. It has been me and Matthias Schönean, and in each new location, we also invited other artists to collaborate with us. So this project, Greenhouse, is a participatory performance that explores interconnectedness of wars and climate change and how they influence our common European landscape. We exercise tools and practices of collective decision-making, collective singing, collective things that we can do in order to find ways of acting upon our common responsibilities. So we went to to 3 different areas, 3 different cities that have been one way or another influenced by armed forces, armed conflicts or war. So maybe you can go to the first slide. The first stop was Yerevan, and in each of the location, we also exercised different formats of participation. In this case, in Yerevan, we worked tightly for 2 weeks with local artists, Paulina Miokuling and Goha Saxian, and opened for a wider, broader audience the participation in the last final performances. The dates are stated down here on right. So the second stop, maybe you can go to the next slide, was Tbilisi. There we decided to include for the tighter collaboration our participants, and we created workshops with them. So for 2 weeks prior to the final presentation, we were having a workshop with around 20 people, and we created a huge, I will say, big collective out of those participants. And then we opened up the final performance to a broader audience and there were 20 hosts already. Yeah, and the next slide is Ukraine. I will be really short about it, but it has been the biggest challenge, I suppose, upon arriving to Ukraine. There has been a drone attack on a residential building right on the first day that we arrived in the neighboring city, but it was quite close to us, so it was a quite stressful way of starting our work, and we learned a lot how to reach communities, and we also understood that some communities participation should not always be a group experience, and we had a more diverse approach to contacting people that we wanted to take part in. And so the format was more about individual meetings and having certain group experiences in a workshop format, and then we collected all the experiences and made a media installation slash performance out of all the voices that we had and wanted to include also. Due to accessibility, some could not be physically present at the final presentation, but we've included those voices. So yes, that's shortly about our tour.
Okay, thank you very much, Teresa. This is really a brief pitch in a nutshell, but we will exchange in a few minutes more deeply about it. Let's hear from a second project, this brief pitch, Katarina, hand in hand. Katarina Moroni is an interdisciplinary artist from Italy, cultural and social activist, working specifically also outdoors in public space and instigating participatory processes in public space, often with specific groups of citizens and taking the form of specific rituals, walks, participatory processes. But you will explain the example of hand in hand, Katarina.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction and for this opportunity also. So, hello everyone. I'm Caterina Moroni and I'm the director of the participatory performance Bloom and Doom, and one of the people who shaped the Hand in Hand project, especially connecting its partners with one shared goal that was to rethink touring in a green and community-rooted way. So for me, this project was not only a tour, I'm quite used to this. It was a real training ground where we tested what it means to work with communities that are very different from one another, and to let those communities and environments in general reshape the artistic form. So maybe we can move to the first, yes, with some picture. So at the center of the project is a Bloom and Doom, that is a participatory walking performance conceived as a flexible and light system, and where local kids are the performers and co-creators, and they lead adults through their city. Each adult then walks hand in hand with a child, shifting the usual roles and entering an unexpected relationship of care, trust, responsibility, and intimacy. And in this way, step by step, we work together, searching for a sense of the future. So along the way, the young guides, they share their knowledge about how to adapt, how to live in a collapsing world, how to keep dreaming, even when things feels uncertain. Maybe we can move to the partner. Yeah, I think it's important to mention all the partners involved in this project. Our lead partner is Indisciplinarte, based in Terni, in Italy, and I'm the artist involved as a partner, and I'm also based in Terni. Then we have 5 organizations that hosted Bloom and Doom during the tour, and that are Teatro dei Mignoli in Bologna, in Italy, where we work with a public school and with a local artist, Carlotta Rodiguero. Then we moved to MESH, Encontro Internacional de Arte Comunidad in Porto, working with a small group of kids at risk from a neighborhood youth center. And there I work with the local artist Mariana Oliveira. Then we have Solidar Teatrul Basca in Timișoara, where I work with the artist Anna Maria Ursu, with a school in a peripheral area. And then we have Artipic in Iași, still Romania, where I work with Stanca Jabenitan, and there we work in a Roma majority neighborhood, where we really had to reshape the project to respond to the local realities. And finally, we toured to Valmiera Summer Theatre Festival in Latvia, where I worked with Sabine Ozzolina, and where we gathered a large group of kids through an open call. So each place was very different from the other. Just a few words on how we worked. Maybe we can move to the next slide. So in each place, we activated a local artist team, while only I traveled from one location to the next. And we worked with a local group of kids through a multi-day workshop, and then we create with them the public presentation together, always adapting the performance to the specific context and to what the community brought. So in every city, we also collected text and drawing for a newspaper from the future. Here you can see some images of that. So a newspaper from 2015. And in my website, you can find the whole collection if you are curious, also from other places where I presented Bloom and Doom. And through this process and through other small actions of exchange, we also connected one group of kids with the next. So creating a link of extended communities across country, a network of young voices imagining the future together. So in our hand-in-hand project, I can say that green and inclusive touring are not two separate goals, but they reinforce one another, because our focus was clear, was engagement with communities. So we worked with people who do not often enter artistic processes, and we allow them to have a real agency in shaping the work. Maybe we can move to the next. Yes, thank you, Egle. But also about green touring to reduce environmental impact. Only I traveled, as I said, to each location, and local artistic teams were activated and became true co-creators. But we consider sustainability not only in terms of carbon footprint, but also in terms of redistributing power, building local capacity, and leaving something behind that stay. For example, this process helped each organization involved in expand its local network. I think I'm out of time, so but thank you so much, and thank you to all the brave partners of the project.
Great. Thank you, Katerina. Very inspiring indeed. Also, the way you connect the social and the green. And we'll talk about this in more depth in just a few moments. But maybe, Beatrice, I will give the floor to you to talk about Moving Kinship. Maybe introduce you. You're independent feminist artist with Italian and Irish roots, also working as a scholar and a psychotherapist, working in very transdisciplinary way, and also in your practice, the social and the environmental are closely connected. Moving Kinship, can you please tell us more about your project?
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks very much for this invitation. It's great to be here at the end of the tour. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully that will be okay. Everybody can see that, hopefully. Yeah, great. Okay, thank you for the introduction, Doris. I am the lead partner and lead artist for Moving Kinship, and I'm a transdisciplinary feminist choreographer and filmmaker with a background as a somatic and movement trauma psychotherapist. So Moving Kinship really grows out of this combined background, and it's a hybrid practice that I've been developing over the last decade. And the focus is, in summary, to reimagine and regenerate the boundaries between performance, participation, and activism. And my focus really there, to say one thing about that, is, because there's lots I could say about that, but to say one thing in summary around that integration of those layers, is that my focus is to challenge and subvert mainstream patriarchal ideas about bodies, body politics, and lived experience. Ideas that imply this is the only way to think about things, or this is the only way to make art about things. So Moving Kinship is a trauma-informed and trauma-responsive choreographic and performance methodology that aims to make visible stories and experiences that are often unheard, unnamed, or dismissed. And that's contemporary and historical experiences and stories. And I recognize that the moving body carries past and present experience. So I work with how careful attention to safety and agency can shape the artistic process. Together with my touring team, which comprises Alexander Lepera, who is a videographer and editor, and Robert Howitt, who is a composer and musician, we collaborated with local professional dancers and actors and communities, in different kinds of communities in 4 countries. In Italy, with intergenerational refugees and migrants. In Latvia, with a young deaf and hearing impaired community. In Ukraine, with war veterans, serving military personnel and civilians. And in the Netherlands, with people living with rare young onset dementia and their families and their carers. So autobiographical and cultural experiences were shared through interview conversations that I conducted with all participants. And I invited them into verbal reflection and embodied engagement. And this shaped the co-created video installations and bespoke performances in each country. And after each performance, there was I facilitated a post-performance audience experience. And all the performance events and video installations were live streamed internationally. And across the tour, people really spoke about, participants and audiences alike, really spoke about transgenerational care, trauma, displacement, racism, disability, resistance, joy, uncertainty, war. And these stories really moved through me as I listened and as I developed the spoken word text and collaborated with the professional dancers and actors and the local communities. And what emerged in the work were embodied testimonies. So personal political accounts expressed through a multimedia combination of dance, spoken word, music, original music, and the spoken text was in all of the original languages. So maybe I'll get to say something about that later in the discussion, but translation was a big process, a big learning process, and really extraordinarily rich, and a bridge to many things, but I won't say anything more about that now. And in our online panel, which I'll mention in a moment, Dr. Funmi Adewole, who is a Nigerian and UK-based dance scholar and dramaturg and educator, spoke about Moving Kinship as a decolonial move because it allows other voices in. And finally, documentation and impact. So the project concluded with an online panel discussion with invited speakers and reviewers, artists, participants from each of the countries, partners, of course. And we also previewed 4 short performance reportage films. And these films extend the legacy of dialogue and accountability that we've been evolving in Moving Kinship, and will also premiere at festivals throughout 2026. And they're shaped directly by the people and stories encountered on the tour. And again, Dr. Funmi Adewole spoke about the films allowing micro-histories to emerge. And this is exactly what Moving Kinship sets out to hold and amplify. And I've put the website, our dedicated website, in the chat, and you'll see in the website all details about partners, and there are also separate pages for each of the 4 countries and each of the bespoke works and their titles with images and links, press links and reviews and testimonies. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice, for this inspirational sharing, and indeed all of you 3. And it's indeed been a very inspirational sharing of very distinct practices, but it's also quite clear that some lines are popping up. Indeed, your projects, they're not, let's say, touring as we know it, one production finished product going on tour and being repeated. In several contexts, it's really recreating and reshaping the work, really taking into account the specificities of the context, so really adaptive. Obviously, also in your work, all of you have been working on that. So maybe as a starting round, before we share your lessons learned, can you maybe briefly identify one point that this project really was a next step in your practice? What was really your main desire, or something that you want to test, or well, a main question that you had before starting the project? And then in the second round, we'll exchange about your lessons learned. But maybe briefly highlight this point. Teresa, what was it for you when touring Greenhouse, or when recreating the project in these specific and also very conflicted areas? What was your main starting point?
Well, a starting point, but also a major learning curve was getting to different group dynamics, and even finding ways of connecting communities that are connected through similar lived experience, but tend to stay in them and don't go out to some other communication with others. And we were really working on psychological level, on also somatic practices to get to talk. And yes, that was quite intense also. And therefore, in the last station, as I mentioned, we had a very hybrid form of outreach of inviting the targeted communities, we learned that it should not always be pressured upon people to stay in a certain one group with us. We can have like parallel processes and still work together, and then combine it all in different, like more hybrid forms for the final shows. So yes, that was a learning material. I think we will go on with this developing new ideas for that.
Yes, and is this on the specific context of Ukraine was of course very challenging. This is also something that you will take along in other areas, situations in the future.
Sure. Yeah. Well, in Ukraine, our main focus was also with veterans and people that were directly affected by war or lost their loved ones. And therefore, of course, we had to get in touch with many tools of facilitation, this kind of conversations, and I think we just started learning a lot.
Yeah. And every context you are in, you learn new things about how to engage with these communities because it's always very specific. Katerina, what was for you the main thing which was at stake when you started? What was in hand? What was like the next step in your trajectory?
Well, we wanted to prove that touring can be ecological, inclusive, and community-led, so not extractive. Our aim was to show that performance can travel without moving big teams and still create deep, meaningful, professional, artistic processes by working with the local artists and children and communities. So we also wanted really to give children a central role as change makers, reversing the usual power dynamics and allowing adults to learn from them, especially about climate, adaptation, and imagination. We also faced some obstacles, of course,
Yes.
and we learned a lot because obstacles because that each context was so radically different, and sometimes the artistic format I had prepared that was already conceived as flexible, simple, didn't fit it. And sometimes the framework worked perfectly, sometimes not often, but at least one remarkable time during the tour, it collapsed completely. But that collapse, I can say that was the beginning of a much deeper, worthy collaboration, of course. So we had to let go, listen deeply, and recreate together with the local artists and teams. I think it's something common that we, the artists traveling with Perform Europe, faced. So that moment of crisis, I can say that became also a turning point. It showed us that adaptability is not just a strategy, it's a form of respect, and that it is essential for truly inclusive artistic work.
Yes. So flexibility, indeed, you can want it in advance, but you need to be flexible with regards to your flexibility. And so it's in the book of
Absolutely.
lessons learned that it's not only a matter of planning, but also a matter of mindset and attitude. Yes.
Sí.
All right. Beatrice, what was at stake for you when you started? What was like the thing that you wanted to test or try out?
Yeah,
Moving Kinship?
listening to Teresa and Katerina, I can hear so many overlaps. And I think for me, the core of what I wanted to test in the methodology was an ethic, really. The focus was to amplify voices and lived experiences through a practice that was participatory, activistic, and fundamentally trauma-informed, given the nature of all of the different contexts that we toured to and the different communities that we work with. So So for me, inclusion isn't so much a theme, it's a response-able ethic. So I'm just separating the word out, response-able. In other words, cultivating the capacity to respond, and to respond artistically to the specificities of each place, each community, each body. So I suppose as I'm saying that, I'm thinking that's really about balancing artistic expression with ethical care. So I think that was, that's the first main point. I mean, I've got a whole load others in my notes and log keeping, but I'll leave it at that for now.
All right, but yeah, maybe to go briefly into our second round, what's really learning points? Maybe Beatrice, we can continue with that and take the reverse order because I think it's very interesting in what you said, and it also resonates with the other practice. When I see shows, they tour content or specific topics. What's specific in all your work is like you work with the methodologies, the artistic processes, and really the content and the topics. They are reshaped completely in a different way in each context. So that's maybe something which is really striking in the, let's say, the spectrum of all your works. But maybe you can also reflect on that. That's also an aspect of this responsibility to really tackle on what's living in a community.
Mm. Do you want me to start?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of learning, again, so such a long list. But I suppose if I start with the trauma-informed aspect, and what does trauma-informed artistic practice mean? And in this context, what I began to notice was that it really does allow for a window of tolerance. It expands a window of tolerance not only for the participants and the communities that we work with, but also fundamentally and importantly for the artists that we collaborated with, the professional artists. So I time and time again, what I heard both the artists and audiences say was that it was an opportunity for them to engage with the work, was an opportunity for them to feel again. And this was really essential. So going into conflict zones, going into a war zone like Ukraine, our wonderful producer from the Ukrainian contemporary dance platform, Alexander Manshilin, reflected that, in Ukraine, he was saying how much they had normalized all of the awful things that were happening on a daily basis, and how he described how hard their skin had become, so this hardening, this density. And I think that this opportunity to feel again and to create another perspective, that not only the work itself, but the whole gestalt, the whole process leading up to the creation of the work, the whole co-creative endeavor, gave them another perspective. So that one of the dance artists, Yulia Skiba, also said that she saw, as a result of the project, that the war was larger in her head than she had first somehow or to date anticipated, that there was a sense of it's not normal to have this as a human experience. And also another dancer, Victoria Horoshilova, was saying that this was the first time that her authenticity and war experience was supported and accepted deeply. And I think it's just being able to create that kind of space and that kind of process, albeit for a short amount of time. I mean, it's like 1 week, but 7 months preparation online.
Okay. These are important lessons learned, not only about how you did different things or things differently, but the importance of what this actually means for the local communities. And it's essential that we keep on highlighting that and that we find ways to making this possible and visible. Maybe Teresa, can you continue because you've also been working in these conflicted areas, and maybe what's your learning point? Does it resonate with that, or do you maybe want to highlight?
Well, yeah, quite
Um,
fully. We
uh,
had a lot of talks, conversations on the ethics and the role of the arts itself, very much. Either it's a therapeutic or didactic or even propaganda. What are we doing? What's the art itself, especially in this conflicted period of time? And therefore, like we were asking people a lot on their political stand, on their activism. How do they act in the societies? And we were getting all this input and trying to make a greenhouse also a bit like a self-help group. The group dynamics that we wanted to build had to be sustainable in itself, that we could help each other out, even though some of us don't operate the specific tools, as you, Beatrice, said, trauma-informed. Like we had this bits and pieces of different informations, but not being very professional in each areas. We were trying to have this collective practices, and we were inviting them, and even like self-developed practices that people just created for themselves in order to calm them down. So a greenhouse was, we had also a book which we carried throughout the city with us, with self-developed practices of coping and getting calming ourselves down. And those were just like exercises that people do on their regular basis to cope. So yes, the sustainability was an issue for us, not to just like move around, but all the group, each group that we created could be some kind of support to each other, and that was one of our goals.
All right, thank you. Indeed, it's interesting to see also in the different projects that there is this legacy, that you leave something behind in these communities, that they're empowered also to deal with all these issues when the performance and the sharing has been done. So let's take that along. Maybe Katarina, maybe round off this panel. What was your main learning point after the touring stopped? What's something that you will take along in your future practice, or that might be relevant for others here in the room?
Well, it's something similar with what we already said, but I think that when we allow a performance to be reshaped by a community, by a school, or by a neighborhood, the work then becomes more alive and more necessary. And in this way, touring is not just about moving a show from place to place, and this we already know, but it's about creating a temporary ecosystem of trust. And that ecosystem can really transform everyone involved. So this is like, I think in some way I already knew this, but this was so clear in this project for us. So also for the sector, I think the key message is if we want greener and more inclusive touring, we need to embrace slower rhythms, deeper relationship, and more shared authorship. Because sustainability is not only about carbon footprint, it's about redistributing power. So, in my opinion, and what I learned also from this project hand in hand, is that touring becomes fairer when local artists lead, when communities have agency, and when the format adapts to realities on the ground. And of course, it's more risky than programming a ready-made show, but this is why we are here, no?
Yes, exactly. This is why we are here. And indeed, as you say, your project is a good example of this shift, moving a piece from place to place to really reshaping it in the ecologies that we enter into, not only sharing, but really making this into an artistic exchange, enriching both the communities where we are, but also our practice. So this is indeed a beautiful takeaway, and I would like to thank all of you for sharing. This is really very inspirational, and I'm sure everybody in the room wants to hear more about it. You shared the links via the presentations and via the chat. Also, if you want to hear more about other projects, at the end of the session, we will be sharing some information about future Perform Europe events where we get into discussion, dialogue, sharing, and exchanges with more of the Perform Europe projects. But right now, what we will do is zoom out a bit, because indeed, these are very inspirational examples, very distinct practices engaging with communities and with climate change. But indeed, we also saw some red lines, which we saw not only in these 3 projects, but also in the other 42. And for this reason, I'm going to give the floor to my colleague Egle, who has been joining in the learning trajectory to share some of the insights of the overall view that we developed together with the 42 projects.
Yes, good morning, everybody. So as we've already been talking today, Perform Europe has been about nurturing change in the sector. So making performing arts touring more inclusive, diverse, and green. But what I think has become obvious already during our panel, that there is no way to achieve this. So even though there are these 2 main Perform Europe priorities, there in fact have been many changes happening within these broader umbrella goals, as we've already heard. And so there have been different strategies and tools that Perform Europe projects have used for making these changes a reality. So we have developed a framework of sorts of Perform Europe strategies and tools, which came about from making sense of all the inputs we've received from Perform Europe projects during the learning trajectory. It's input from the learning trajectory workshops, internal discussions among project partners, their reflections about the changes they wanted to make, the obstacles they faced, their lessons learned. But it's also has been fed into by Perform Europe network events that have been happening in the last few months. So collecting all these insights, we have discovered that although there's 2 priority lines of diversity, inclusion, and fighting climate change, in fact, there are 4 domains of strategies for bringing about that change that we saw in Perform Europe projects. So here it is. It's an overview, and later we'll go through all the 12 strategies more closely. But maybe first to introduce the 4 domains. So we have the red corner, which is the artistic domain of strategies focusing on rooting creative work in specific contexts, in diverse knowledges, embodied experiences, and collaborative processes. In blue, we have the community domain, which are strategies about building inclusive relationships with diverse communities and doing so with a sense of responsibility. In green, we have the ecological strategies about reshaping performing arts' relationship to the environment, but also about using art to kind of nurture knowledge and awareness and learning, as well as collective action. And in pink, we have the organizational domain, which are strategies about fostering fair and caring, as well as adaptive ways of working together. So to visualize all this information, as there's quite a bit, we have developed 12 posters that capture really the essence of each of these strategies. So I will show you how these posters look, and you'll have a chance to explore them for yourself in just a minute. So for each poster representing a strategy, we have a strategy title on the top, a guiding or a discussion question to kind of guide conversation, and 3 key ideas corresponding to the strategy, as well as tools that are examples from the Perform Europe projects of something that the projects did and practiced during the process, as well as examples from Perform Europe 2 projects. Yes, so we will introduce the strategies in our upcoming interactive rounds, but for now, we would like you to keep a question in mind when you learn about this. So which of these Perform Europe strategies are relevant to your context, and why, and how do you relate to them?
All right. In just a second, we're going to be going in interactive mode. Don't be scared. It's going to be really nice talking to each other, not only listening, but also reflecting on how these strategies relate to our work. Most of us, or many of us, are quite new to the topic. So we might be interested in really exploring some of these strategies or adapting into our contexts. We might be interested in setting more experiments about it or really integrating some of these elements in our own work. So this is kind of like the mindset that we can go into when we go into interactive mode. Let's explain first how are we going to do it. So as you might have guessed by now, there's a lot of material that we have. So we're going to bring it in as one step at a time. We're going to work in 2 rounds where Egle will be presenting in a bit more detail what's underlying these strategies, what are really the main insights. And the first round will be about the ecological strategies and about the community-oriented strategies. Second round will be about the artistic and the organizational strategies. So what Egle will do is briefly introduce the strategies in these sections, and then we will break out in small groups of 4. So indeed, you will get to know who's in the room in a bit more details, and also explain or engage how you resonate with these, with what's been said. What's really striking to you? What is a strategy that you have experience with, or which one would you like to work with? And also explain to your colleagues why you would be interested in that. It's interesting for us as well, because I said your feedback will be used and feed into the Perform Europe research. So for us, it's also interesting to know which of these strategies resonate with which context. So therefore, it's really important that we also get some feedback from you, and we will harvest this in a plenary summary after the breakouts. We will get back together in the plenary room. We will start a poll, but we will also ask you to explain why these strategies are more relevant to your work, to your practice, to your context. Share that with us via the Miro board or via the chat. So this is how the 2 rounds are built up. But first, we're going to have a small break, which will allow you to have a look at the material that Egle briefly introduced. We will be sharing the material via 2 ways. Maybe Christina, if you can already drop some links in the chat. First, we have a Miro board, where we have a reading zone. Later on, we will be working in the Miro board to capture your feedback on strategies and why they resonate with you. You can go to the Miro board. Maybe also we can go to the next slide, Egle. So you have a visual here on the left of the Miro board and the reading zone. If you're accustomed to Miro, you can zoom in and zoom out and know more about what's on these posters and on the strategies. Also, there is the blog platform where we've been sharing a lot of materials. And for those who are less, let's say, Miro-minded, you can also download a PDF with the overview of the posters. Also, maybe Christina, if you can drop the PDF in the chat, it's already been done. So there are 2 ways of, let's say, exploring what is there before we go into the introductions. It's here that we have a 10-minute active break. Let's make this into a 5-minute break, because I think we're already a little bit over time. Let's look at the clock, 10:58. At 11:03, we will get back in the room for the first round of exchanges. But for now, you are welcome to take a bit of air, a coffee, and explore what's on the posters. All right. That was a 10-minute active break turned into a 5-minute hyperactive break. And while I will be turning on my camera, maybe we can get over into interactive mode. So yes, let's advance. This one is over. Okay, round one. As I said, we'll be exchanging more in detail about the ecological strategies and the community strategies. So these are two strategies that really resonate with the priorities of Perform Europe, aiming at fighting climate change, but also at more inclusive and diverse touring projects. But as we've seen also previously in the inspirational exchange with the project, it of course resonates a lot with our own practices. So let's see what Perform Europe projects have been working on and what strategies they deployed. Just a brief reminder, so Egle will present some of these strategies, but also we will be asking you to actively engage with them, to think on which of these strategies really resonate with your practice, with your context, and explain why. So as I said, after the breakout, we will be harvesting your ideas via a poll, via a Miro, via a chat. Maybe we can already, or we can do that in a moment. Drop already the link to the workboard. So for those who have been in Miro, who are in Miro, you have been maybe engaging in the reading zone, engaging with the strategies. But if interested, you can now also enter the work zone with regards to the ecological and community-oriented strategies. This is what it looks like. Maybe if the link specifically to this one can be dropped in the chat, you can see that it's a working zone where you can really actively engage with the strategies that Egle will be presenting. You can leave comments, you can leave post-its. So that's how you can do that along the way. But maybe first now, it's good to hear about the strategies themselves and how Perform Europe projects have been engaging with communities and with the environment. Egle.
Yes, let's start with the community strategies. So the first strategy we have discovered is building trusts and relationships with communities and ecosystems. So building these relationships that are grounded in care and mutual respect, and doing so through attentive and thoughtful engagement. So this could be reaching out to communities, being present and actively listening where they are, meeting them where they are, building bridges and connecting with key community figures and organizations to kind of reach and connect with the communities better, but also recognizing the time and space needed for such relationships to grow. Moving on, the second community strategy is creating a context for a complex theme. So with this strategy, the focus is really on thoughtful preparation and audience engagement across all stages of the project. So engaging audiences early to prepare the ground for the topics that will be tackled, creating relevant contextual programming parallel to the artistic presentation, but also allowing for the themes to echo and the conversations around the performance and the topics to continue beyond the showings. And the third community strategy we have discovered is designing inclusive and accessible activities. So with this strategy, it's really about putting the needs and perspectives of diverse audiences at the heart of the project from the very beginning. So designing from the perspective of diverse users and together with them, not for them. Also integrating accessibility criteria into every step of design and production, but also more internally bringing in capacity and expertise within our teams. So these were the community strategies, and moving on to the ecological domain. We start with greening touring and production practices. So on the one hand, the strategy is focused on reducing the environmental impact of existing touring practices, and on the other hand, on reimagining touring more fundamentally. So on the first case, it could be reducing emissions, rethinking travel, resource use, material use, optimizing touring schedules and routes to minimize distance and maximize impact. And then also developing completely new and experimental touring concepts, as we already heard about today with the hand-in-hand project, for example. The second ecological strategy is blending art with environmental activism, and doing so through interdisciplinary collaboration, experimental dialogue, kind of aiming to challenge these boundaries and habits of thinking and creating, especially when it relates to climate change. So treating climate not really as a separate topic, but rather as a lens. And for example, connecting artists, activists, scientists, citizens, local communities in shared projects, but also creating labs for cross-sectoral learning and co-creation and experimentation, but also developing and creating performative formats that merge these two spheres. And the final ecological strategy is raising ecological awareness through art and education. So the strategy really recognizes that training, education, and artistic practice can come together to foster ecological awareness. So recognizing that performances really have the power to make complex issues such as climate change more tangible and understandable, as well as collective and connect with communities deeper. But also recognizing that learning can really deepen when audiences are given opportunity to actively prepare, contribute, and reflect, and they are very eager to do so. And on a more internal organizational note, it's understanding that ecological values also need to be embedded in our daily practices, in our vision, and in our training.
All right. Thank you, Eglan. So let's now think about what this really means for us, for our practice, for our context. You might have the strategies in front of you in the PDF. You might have joined the Miro. What we are going to do now is break out in smaller groups of 4 and so let's see this as kind of like a speed date to get into an exchange with others in the room, and really as a brief introduction of yourself, but also which of the as a conversation that you will have about which of these strategies resonate with your context. It might be that you've already experienced with them, that you've set up experiments, that you're really an advocate for specific strategies. It also might be that you have an interest in exploring one of these in your future projects or practices, or if you want to learn more about it. So we're going to divide you in smaller groups of 4. Please enjoy the conversation and get back afterwards in the plenary. And then we will be polling which of these strategies, the 6 that has been presented, resonate most with your context, and have an idea ready of why this is the most relevant to your practice. And we will exchange about that. Okay, Christina, I would say without further ado, we can divide ourselves in the breakouts. Right, we're slowly getting back into the main room. Welcome back, everybody. Well, already some of us are back. Some are really squeezing out the last seconds of the conversations in the groups. Let's wait maybe just a few more seconds before everybody's here. And then we will be starting a plenary exchange. Okay, all breakout rooms have been closed. Everybody's really coming back now. All right. I hope you really had good conversations, that you met new people, and that you were inspired by the sharing of others, or could share your own practices. And now we're curious to see what came out of your discussions and how did you engage with the strategies that Egle has presented, the community strategies and the ecological strategies. We will be harvesting these insights that you want to share with us in two ways. First, we will start with the Slido poll. Let's see. So you can once more scan the QR code, you know how it works. We have the 6 strategies here, the 3 community strategies, the 3 ecological strategies. And the question is, which of these strategies, you can pick 2, are the most relevant for your practice and for your context? Let's see how this works. Some QR code acrobatics. Scan this with your smartphone, but you can also, if you don't have a smartphone, check in at slido.com and type this number 243-4170. And in the meantime, first results are popping in. I think we are with a group of 77. So I think almost half of people have voted. And yes, so let's see. That's, well, 2/3 almost of us have voted. We already start to see some trends. So the one on the top is building trust and relationships with communities and ecosystems. This was really a strategy which is very important when we're engaging with these contexts, that it's really an engagement also with the people and with the communities in these contexts. What we learned from the strategies is really that this is something that takes a lot of time. This is something where you will be also working together with local actors, like in the examples that we saw, for instance, hand-in-hand projects, small international teams touring, but really actively engaging local actors and communities. And also in Moving Kinship, these hubs also were active co-productions with local organizations. So this is something that resonates a lot. Second one is the ecological one. So it's really about the optimization of and decarbonization of international touring. But as we've seen in the examples, it's also rethinking of what touring really is and reshaping productions in contexts. After that, there are the 2 other community themes that got the most votes. So this is interesting feedback. Thanks. But of course, we also want to understand why you gave these answers. And maybe if you can just share something about that. Why did you pick this answer? And there are 2 ways of doing it. Maybe you can either do it in the Miro board. Is it possible to share that Miro board as well? That we can see what's happening. Take a few more minutes to do that. Write it on a post-it, or maybe it's even more convenient, just drop it in the chat. Let's do just that. Drop in the chat why you picked the answer that you chose. And let's see. Yeah. Drop in the chat, explain us why did you vote specifically for this building trust or for another one. Yes. I don't see yet a lot of chat answers popping up. Please take your time. There are some people in the Miro boards. We have some comments, specifically about creating this context, specifically for complex teams. Really important to take into account also specificities of rural touring, using local community spaces as venues, such as village halls, churches, outdoor green spaces. So this obviously relates also to this strategy of building trust. It's also important, indeed, the same person said, to really engage with local promoters. Same person is very active, sharing about how to engage with specifically rural communities, mentioning it's also important that artists are there, and also sharing the importance of working in remote areas, because everybody has the right to access. Yes. Joe mentioned that indeed it's very important to pick strategies which are close to your interests, in this case being immersive technology, which could be indeed an interesting approach to indeed touring without traveling, but also new forms of audience engagement. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Indeed, we need a lot of artists to bring communities together, Casper said, to really think about sustainable touring. So this is really the exchange also that you have within partnerships, but also with local communities about this. And indeed, engaging with the communities in itself is a goal. Jaka says, but there's also a goal beyond that. So it's really engaging in the communities with regards to specific issues, arts, activism, activism. All right, don't hesitate. There are already a number of comments in the chats. Don't hesitate to share them, because as I said, it's important. We're taking this along in the research, and we've been working intensively with all selected projects. But for us, it's really interesting and relevant also to see what strategies resonate with the broader performing arts community in all Creative Europe countries and how this works. All right, continue to share why these strategies matter to you most. For now, we will advance to the next round, which is specifically also about the artistic and organizational strategies. Yes, you will know the drill by now. There will be a brief introduction by Egla, then a breakout in groups. It will be even shorter, this one, because noon is coming soon, and that rhymes. And after that, we'll be getting back in the plenary to do a similar poll, to share your insights, but also to have a look at what's next for Perform Europe.
Yes, so moving on to the artistic strategies. We start off with pooling diverse perspectives and forms of knowledge. So this strategy really encompasses giving the stage to an exploration of different kinds of knowledges, intuitions, and feelings through performative practices. So that could mean rooting works in local knowledges and lived realities, especially those of marginalized communities, but also pooling knowledge from different domains of society, different sectors, different disciplines, different genres, but also recognizing that on stage and beyond, hybrid perspectives are created by having diverse artistic teams, allowing for a new perspective to come to light. The second artistic strategy is developing artistic formats and scenarios adaptive to context. So this strategy is really about balancing artistic vision with an openness and adaptability to different contexts. So anticipating that there will be diverse contexts, and one needs to prepare formats and scenarios to adapt, but also letting each environment reshape the work and encounter a context with an openness. And sometimes to help that happen, we need to engage mediators and translators to bridge contexts, cultures, languages. And it's not always work you can do by yourself as an artist. And the final third artistic strategy is engaging and mobilizing participants via interactive experiences. So the strategy views performance as a shared experience, really where these boundaries between who's a performer, who's a participant, audience member can be intentionally blurred by inviting audiences into the work, allow them to do rather than just watch, letting bodies, emotions, stories kind of collide in moments of shared creation and experimentation, but also enabling environments where that kind of collision is safe and meaningful and shared so that everyone feels safe and invited to contribute. Now, moving on to the final set of strategies, and that's the organizational domain, which was really discussed perhaps the most out of all of these domains during the Lawkeeper meetings during the learning trajectory. So the first one here is caring and sharing when working together. So the strategy is about cultivating trust and mutual support within collaborations as really the necessary elements in a healthy partnership. So this could relate to setting shared responsibilities and values, kind of clearing that up, creating welcoming and safe environments for many different voices and rhythms and perspectives, and working in a way that really centers care. The second organizational strategy is designing projects as spaces for collective learning. And this strategy really treats learning as a core element of a successful collaboration. So it's about giving partnerships room to learn and grow, but also planning and monitoring for impact, and as well as sharing the lessons we learn along the way with the outside world. So engaging in advocacy and embodying the idea of leaving something behind, something that Katerina actually mentioned today already. And the final organizational strategy is planning for adaptive, fair, and slower processes, which are necessary for sustainable and fulfilling collaborations. So planning for changing circumstances and for the long term, managing resources fairly and transparently within partnerships, but also treating time as a core resource which is needed for care and learning and all these softer factors, and recognizing the financial weight that time can carry sometimes. And that is them all.
All right, these were the artistic strategies and the organizational strategies, essential ones, because we've been talking about community orientation, we've been talking about fighting climate change, but we are here also specifically because we are working in the arts, in the performing arts, and this is our way of making a change with regards to these societal issues at stake. So this is also very inspirational. What kind of art do you need in order to achieve this broader goal, but also how do we work together? And these have been very important things discussed in the Lawkeeper exchanges. So we're quite interested to see also how this resonates with your practice, artistic practice, maybe formats you've been developing, ways of co-creating, adapting the work, or really designing immersive contexts where ecologies and artists can share and exchange, or maybe working in a care-based way, creating learning settings, and really planning for fairness. Let's see, you know the drill by now. We will be exchanging in smaller groups. Looking at the clock, so this will be 10-minute groups, so that we can also have a bit of time to really harvest your insights in the plenary and look at the future together. We're slowly getting back into the plenary. Welcome back. for those who are already there. And we'll wait just a few more seconds for those just squeezing out these last seconds of conversation. 20 minutes. Breakouts will be closing, and then we will harvest everybody's insights and feedback before we close the session. Okay. Well, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you had nice exchanges about organizational strategies, the way we work together in a care-based way, creating learning contexts and planning for fairness, or the artistic strategies we developed to really pool these diverse forms of experience, perspectives, knowledges. Let's indeed go to the next poll to see which of these topics resonated most with you, your practice, and your context. So you can, maybe you're still in the Slido via your phone, otherwise you can scan the QR code or join the poll at slido.com 2434170, just like the way we did for the community and the ecological strategies. And we're quite curious to see what resonates most. Will it be the artistic strategies, or will it be these organizational strategies? Will it be the way we work with communities in our artistic practice, when creating and producing, but also when sharing? Or will it be really about the way we work together and the shift that we need to make in our organizational practice with regards to as a way of making this happen? We cannot be careful with communities if we are not careful towards ourselves and towards our partners. Let's see. I think half of the people voted, and it's clearly the artistic strategies that resonate most. And it's interesting to say that it's this strategy about adaptivity, really developing artistic formats and scenarios which really allow us to shift the shapes. As we've seen, it's an interesting way with the ultimate goal to really also have not only positive climate impact, but also really engaging with these communities and letting the context into our work. So this is the one that resonated most. And as we've seen in the interesting exchange that we had with Hand in Hand, Moving Kinship, and also with Greenhouse, this is not a matter of planning, but also a matter of mindset and flexibility. Second one is engaging and mobilizing participants via interactive experiences. So this was really the strategy where we are breaking the so-called fourth wall. And as we said, indeed, it's this touring is really about exchanging between artistic practices and these local contexts, and not only one-directional forms of communication. Yes, the organizational strategies also resonate. 1 out of 4 voted for really the care-based practices. And it's interesting to see that also this learning aspect is there. Because really that's we talked in the panel also about the legacy. Collective learning is important so that we can document, share, demonstrate the impact, but also yes, help others to learn from our experiences. We're interested to see why you voted for these strategies. So once more, we invite you to share about this. Why did you choose specifically for instance, the adaptivity strategy, or for the interactive experiences, or for anything else? Because as I said, it's important for us as a takeaway with regards to the learning trajectory. Not only have we been sharing what's important for the selected projects in Perform Europe, but also we want to know what resonates with the broader context. So let's have a look at what's there in the chat and in the Miro boards. Take your time to drop your ideas in the chat. If I look at the Miro board, we saw that indeed some people have been engaging specifically also with the organizational aspects, stressing importance of really treating time as something which needs to be planned, a resource. Time is so important to really achieve what we want to achieve, the slowness, but it really needs to be planned and treated as a resources and budgeted. And talking about resources, someone stressed that indeed the managing of resources in a fair and transparent way is really important because, of course, in the partnerships, we're often working with a diversity of partners with different resources. So how are we going to balance that to have really an equal space of sharing? Let's have a look at the chats. Yes. Yes. So Beatrice, indeed, you say that C1 and C3, I think it's really the care-based work and also the planning are very interconnected in your practice. And indeed, of course, they resonate a lot. Time is important, Olive. Thanks for sharing. And indeed, it's an interesting remark by Anya, who says organizational strategies don't resonate with their context because they're really impossible with regards to the structures we work in. This is really an interesting remark and also very relevant because today we've been talking about these strategies and it all seems very inspirational. But indeed, we know in our practice that we encounter a lot of obstacles. So that's indeed maybe also a bridge towards the future. And we've been talking with law keepers also about all the impediments that we encounter along the way with regards to the funding we need, the funding structures, with regards to really also the conflict that we see between these strategies and the way the sector is oriented broadly, how to slow down in a sector where visibility and short-term results are so much valued. So this is really something that we will also be working further on in the future. I'll say a few more words about that in just a second. Yes. Teresa, is indeed for you. It's very important to really encourage the participants to speak for themselves. Indeed, learning skills, active listening, stepping back also and creating this space is very important. All right, good. I see noon is almost there, so it's a good time to maybe wrap up the session. Thank you very much and keep sharing why these strategies resonate while we are going to close the session in just a second. First, by indeed thanking you for your engagement. We hope this was also interesting for you to know what has been developed in Perform Europe in the projects and maybe also get inspired in translating this or adapting it to our own context. As you might have been very much inspired by the 3 practices which have been shared. Thanks a lot once more. Hand in hand, Moving Kinship and Greenhouse. And if you want to know more, then you can indeed join us in the new year for 2 sessions. 30th of January, we will be focusing on green touring with a lot more sharing of experiences from the ground. 6th of February, join us for a session specifically dedicated at inclusive touring strategies in practice, also giving the floor and highlighting a number of interesting and inspirational practices. You can register via the Perform Europe website, and the link has been dropped in the chat. So we are really looking forward to these sessions and to seeing you there. Also, maybe to briefly hint, we are working on a 3rd session as well. It's not yet finished, but we hope to be able to communicate about this sooner if we manage to make this happen. And this will be a really very special one where we're going to test our futuring skills inspired by some of the Perform Europe projects. But stay tuned for that. And for now, what can you expect more? So we will be finalizing all this material in a guidebook. So this will be a publication that we will be publishing in March, and it will be kind of like the logbook of Perform Europe. You will be able to learn more about all these projects, but also this is going to be really a tool for you to be able to work with the material that we have shared today. And so we've been sharing these strategies, not as a way of, not only as a way of sharing what's been developed in Perform Europe, but really as a tool for you, everybody, artists, venues, festivals, producers, also maybe researchers, writers, to really actively engage with this. So it will be a guidebook full of practical tools that will help you translate these insights to your practice. Also, there will be a policy development module, and we've been talking about how structures are in the way, about obstacles that we encounter along the way. In that sense, it's really important that we also work more on the policy level to really allow for the development of more leverages to allow you in your practice to really engage with this and to overcome these obstacles with regards to organizational and funding structures that were mentioned in the chat. So this is really important. You're kindly invited also to explore more of the learning trajectory material via the blog. And maybe one last thing that we can ask you is to fill in the feedback form in the QR code in the top. What you will see there is just a few, two more questions that will help us to advance and to keep on developing knowledge sharing formats that are really useful for you. Two questions to us. In this session, we really wanted to give you new insights with regard to greening and touring practices and make them more inclusive. Give us some feedback on how the session worked for you. And this way we can improve our work also in the future. You've kindly requested to do that. So I'll give you just a few more seconds also to scan this code that you are in this feedback questionnaire environment. And then, yes, I will thank you, everybody. I will firstly thank once more Caterina and Teresa and Beatrice for sharing, also Egle and Christina and Margherita here for supporting us in the office, and hope to see you soon in one of the future learning sessions for Perform Europe. Thank you very much.